Don't click away, folks. Discover how this Jumble Backpack tutorial takes in the hoop embroidery to dazzling new heights. Take it away, Martyn.
Welcome to the Jumble Backpack. We're going to be creating our front panel by joining the three panels together. Clip or pin the top two panels, so the top panel and the bottom panel are different in shape. So the narrower curved panel is the top. So let's join those together, and we're going to be stitching just inside the perimeter stitching line. Make sure that the lines are sitting on top of each other as we clip them together. We're going to sew that seam, and we're just stitching just inside the perimeter stitching line. Make sure we've got seam on or stitching line on top of stitching line, because when we turn it through we don't want to see any of that perimeter stitching. With a multicolored project like this, I use quite a dark thread because it'll actually captures more of the colours, but it's up to you. Again, let's do this. Pop the bottom panel onto our middle panel. Again, clipping into position. Then when we sew, it's seam on top of seam, stitching just inside the perimeter stitching line. Just check to see that we haven't got any stitching showing through, and then we're going to press those seams open. Okay, press those seams open, and that's our front panel made. There's our back panel made, joined together in the same way with the seams pressed open. You could actually turn that, you could actually cut two of these panels and create a front and a back without doing the flip and fold. It's just up to you of how you wish to create this backpack. Folding side seams together, seam on seam, and we're going to clip and find our center notch on both our bottom panel and our top panel. Very essential we know where the centers are. Now we're going to measure out about 2.5 inches and place our square D-rings, which have been attached to a loop of banding or strap that we made without any interfacing in, by the way. Don't have to have them on the bottom. You could have them on the side, on the that's about 3 inches down from that seam. You could put them on the side if you wished, if you thought those were more comfortable. Don't put them on the corner. So you could put them on the side. We actually did leave them at the bottom, but for some people I think, well, that is more comfortable to have them on the side. It doesn't matter. Whatever you wish to do, it is not incorrect to have them at the side or at the bottom. Just do what you feel you want to do. So 3 inches down from the seam if you want to put it into that position. And we'll be attaching those with machine basting just within inside the seam allowance to keep them in place. Okay, so as you can see, we've left them at the bottom, attached them. We need to thread our strap, our back strap, through the bottom loop, then through one side and then through the other side, and then we're just going to attach the top of that strap to the top of the back panel. Okay, attach that there. So we've done it. The top of the back panels are side by side. Okay, just at that center notch. They need to be attached before we actually make up the bag. So if you want to actually just clip those together so they're nice and flat, whatever you want to do, but they need to be attached. They can't be put on last. They need to go now. Let's make up our zip closure. Zip's a bit longer than we need, so I usually like an inch more than what we need either end. And we're going to be just attaching the outer fabric, which is the dark, the outer fabric to the edge of the zip tape. We'll be sewing this with a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so there's a 1/4 inch seam. Don't press it just yet. Attach the other side. And again, that will be sewn with a 1/4 inch seam just on the zip tape. I cut these pieces just slightly narrower than they should have been, basically so I could use that fabric. So we're going to attach that with a 1/4 inch seam as well. There they are, attached. Just a very light press, and then we're going to sandwich the zip tape in between a piece of lining. So we're going to be putting those in the same position and then stitching through that original row of stitching again, 1/4 inch, and that will sandwich the zip tape in between the lining and the outer fabric. We want to do that on both sides. And once I've done that, okay, so we're going to do the same with the other side. So once I've done that, I then just top stitched. I pressed it and top stitched it. You can do whatever you wish. Okay, so that's sandwiching that in. That's going to be the inside of the zipper, and that's the outside of the zipper. And we've got that last side to do. And then I just top stitched along the edge of that zip tape. There we go. I actually put 2 threads through the needle to get a little bit bolder stitch. And here we are, just putting the zip on. And then we've got the tabs that are for, well, they're like keepers for the zip. And I just put some little tabs on the edge. I don't want them to be too big. So 1.25 inches is more than enough. So I'm just going to trim that back slightly. 1.25 inches, 3 centimeters. Yeah. And then just, it needs to sit over top of the zip teeth, and it stops the zip from running off, of course. Just attach those within the seam allowance. Okay. Those are our stoppers. Just makes the bag look a little bit more professional, having those little stoppers there. You could actually put a D-ring in them there if you wanted to put a handle on the bag. It's up to you. So we've made the pocket up. This is what we've got so far. It's made in the hoop. Let's just trim out our stabilizer. I mean, so you could use a tearaway if you wished. I haven't. I wanted to use a little bit more firmer stabilizer. And then we need to trim back our zip as well at some stage, but I'm going to stitch in the ditch around the edge there just to keep the layers together in the next stitch. But we're going to finish the end of the zips first. We'll just cut them back to 1 inch, and then we're just with a loop of bias binding or ribbon. There's a loop of turned bias binding. Just wrap that over. See how much it needs to be. We're just going to stitch down the edge. Stitch down the edge there and then turn it through. I've just stitched that. Open that seam up with your fingers. Turn it through and slide it onto the cut end of the zip. and just stitch around the square of it. That just protects the ends of the zip and so they're not raw inside the pocket. Right, so now you see I've stitched in the ditch around that square, and I've just attached the edges together around the outside edge. And we're going to fold those seams on top of each other and then stitch to the point. A little closer look. So fold the seams on top of each other and you can see there's a little square there, and we're going to stitch a straight line from the outside right to that point. That's going to give us the cargo pocket. That's going to give us the dimension on the cargo pocket when we turn it through. There we go. Now, because we've used a white bobbin in our embroidery when we did our flip and fold, sometimes you do see the odd stitch, so be aware of that. Again, edge on edge, seam on seam, stitch on a 90-degree angle out to that point on all four corners. Don't stitch over the zip, please. Don't trim anything out just yet. So there we have our little tray, which we can turn through. Now I just open that out and form that little triangle, and then trim off those ends. You can give it a light press if you wish, those little corners. Just a very, very light press, and then we're going to trim across those corners. One, two. Do that on each corner. And then, once we've got that debris away, we're going to turn it over and we're going to trim out a little triangle on the inside, because we're going to zigzag around the edge of that, or you could overlock if you have an overlocker. But before you do that, I want you to trim out a little triangle, and I'll show you where. So there's one that's not been done. So pop a pin through on, that's just about 3/8, half an inch in. Just mark that point. And from the crease of that little triangle, clip down and then clip back up again. It just removes the actual bulk out of that corner slightly. Okay, so got one more. Put a pin in at that half-inch point. Mark the point. And just trim that little corner out. Right, and so now we're going to actually fold over those edges and give that edge a press. Now you can fold it over and give it a press. You could also machine baste it with a long stitch to actually fold that edge over and just keep it in place while we position and top stitch it onto the front of our backpack. Now I know the measurement from the front of my pack, which is 6x6, that front panel, the 6x6. I'm going to draw my 6x6 square onto the front. Make a template up to do this if you wish, or you could just find the center points and find the center points on both those seams and measure out 3 from either side. That will give you a 6x6. I'm using the top seam as my position marker. It doesn't matter where this pocket sits. There is no right or wrong positioning on it. You can sit it lower, you can sit it higher, wherever you want it to be. You don't even have to have a pocket if you don't want one. I just think they're quite handy for putting everyday stuff in that you generally would not want to be searching around the bottom of your backpack with. So this is the medium size. This is our 6x10 size. Still makes a decent sized backpack. It would probably be a little bit small for my needs. The next one up is probably what I would probably want to do. Then we have a tiny baby one, which is so cute. So I'm just corners where that seam is on the corners. Been turned it over. I've just pressed these, but then I went back and decided that I wanted to I machine based them so as they looked a little bit easier to work with. I think I mentioned that in the notes. You'll see when I come to stitch that, you'll see the machine basting, which I've just turned under that edge. Okay, so that's in the right position. See my machine basting, this long stitch. I'm following the edge of my pocket to the edge of my stitching. My edge of my pocket to the edge of my marking. Sew up to the corner, sink your needle, and pivot. I did a bit of a reinforcement stitch when I got to the corner. Tuck that in, and the folded edge sits along the edge of your chalk marking line. I'm using a 1/4 inch foot, which has got a little bit of a wide gap. It's my Juki foot, which I love. And this is perfect for doing this sort of job because the edge of the fold just sits right into the crease of that foot. Around the edge, then back tack, we are done. There's our pocket on. So when you open the pocket, you'll see the back of the patchwork piece because there's no lining in it. Up to you how you want to put a lining in it, you put a lining in it. So that's where we are now. So we have it joined on. We want to just take our basting stitch around the edge out at this stage. Well, you could leave it. You don't have to take it out right now. I think I'll show you that shows you how that we just unpick a few stitches and then just pull it out. You can fold that, increase that so as it's a little bit flatter, or you can leave it so as it's proud and high, whatever you want to do. Okay, so there's our basting stitches. So I'm going to grab a pointy point of some sort, usually a seam ripper or an awl or what have you, and just quickly pick out those stitches around the edge. Okay, let's back up our linings. Now our lining was cut off the fronts and backs of the joined panels. But we've already put our centre notches in, so we've got a centre notch at the top and a centre notch at the bottom. We've also got our side notch there for where our zip is going to finish, which I think is about 2 centimetres down from that seam. Transferring our notches is very important because you want the lining to represent the outside of the backpack as well. So there we have, there's our notches, just little clips, done. Let's put that aside for the moment with our base pieces. And there we have our side pieces and our base piece. We want to join these side pieces onto each other. Open the seam up. Or we will open the seam up. See? There. So there we want those seams to be. There's no sense in keeping them closed. It'll just add bulk. And now we want to add onto our top layer as well, just to put a clip into each end. This is going to be our outside gusset. So our zip is finished. We're going to be sewing the edge of this circular piece to either side of the backpack. There's the little tabs for our zip. So there seems now you'll see that my zip panel there is just slightly shy of the actual outside panel by, it's not even 1/4 of an inch. But I'm just going to make the compensation for that when I'm actually sewing it onto the seam. In the notes, you have the correct measurement. Okay, so let's just sew down those seams, and then we need to open those bottom seams. That top seam, just let it stay flat. The seam where those base panels go onto our zipper, let that seam stay flat. I think I've edge stitched it along the edge of on the inside. I think I just edged it so to keep it all nice and flat, but it's up to you. You don't have to do that edge stitching along there. We want to find our zip and gusset seam to the notch on the front, which is 2 centimeters down from that seam allowance. I think it's 2 or 2.5. Find our center on center at our base. And then from where the curve starts, clip every 3/8 of an inch. And we just spread that out as we stitch around the curve. It should all fit beautifully. If you haven't taken an incorrect seam allowance, it should be just right. And the same thing here, we're going to be, so we do the first seam, and then I do it in quarters. I like to do the 2 bottoms on the left and the right on the bottom, and then I do the top. I like to do it in sections. I don't pin all the way around. I do it in sections, bite-sized bits, because you find that your pins or your clips don't get in the way. Now, when sewing a seam like this around a perimeter, you need to sew quite close to the original, past the original line of stitching. Sometimes when you're manipulating a curve, it's very hard turning a corner and trying to get that seam to sit on top of itself. So sometimes it's a matter of sewing the seam once and then going back and correcting your wobbly line. And I'm using a zip foot for this because it's more visual and you can get close to the stitching. See where my step is there, because I had that zip gusset was a little bit narrow. The step was a little bit just out by a good 1/8 of an inch. Now see those stitchings on the corner? I would go back and re-stitch over that to make sure I capture them. And you can see at the bottom right hand corner here, you can see where I've stitched in. Right, that is one side. It's taking shape already. Once you have this side done, and then you're going to place the actual back side of the backpack on with one with the straps, which we've already done. We've already made up. Once the outer shell is completed, the inner shell is so quick. Right, so right sides together, notch on seam, center on center, notch on seam, center on center. Now we're going to be working so as that was facing down to the machine, and we have the straight gusset on the top, which we clip around those curves. So there we have our back and our front on. It's the same principle, both back and front. Back and front on, and that is a nice wide opening for a backpack. Let's move on to the lining, because that's going to give this the real finish. Such a cute project, it really, really is. Before you put a lining in though, you could give those seams a little bit of a press from the outside, or a steam. We want to make up our gusset like we did with our outer shell. We've transferred our notches, because on the top of those side gussets we're going to fold over a 1/2 inch seam, and that's where they'll match the notch. We're going to sew the gusset round from notch to notch, but not across the top. Find our centre points by again folding our bottom base panel in half, finding our centre points, and then we're going to have to leave a 5-inch gap to pull our project through. Now I like, rather than actually pinning into place, sometimes I like to just do what I call machine basting. So I've pressed over the 1/2 inch on that top gusset, and I'm just going to stitch for an 1.5 inches to attach these layers together. And it's machine basting or machine pinning. And I've left a 5-inch gap here, so we're just going to start where our gap marker is. Do a few stitches. Now on our gusset, when I made the gusset up, I actually stitched around the outside. I stay stitched at 1/2 inch or so as I had something to follow to clip to, like when we're doing this now. Otherwise you're just randomly clipping into fabric and you don't know where to start or stop. So you can see I'm stitching just inside that 1/2 inch stitching line, or that stay stitching line, which is on the gusset. Okay, so that's the first quarter done. We're going to be finishing at this point, so rather than just having to finish with a pen, I'm going to actually machine finish or machine baste that last section in. Clip my curve, and once that curve is clipped, we're ready to actually go back to the top. That folded edge against the notch, stitching down just inside our stay stitching of our gusset. Purposely done this in a dark colour so you can see. This might be a little bit of a full corner. If you get a few pleats in a lining, it doesn't matter. Okay, I've got a few pleats there, but hey, I'm happy. Let's put the other side on as well. This one doesn't have an opening in it, the seam. This is the other gusset seam. So we want centre on centre at the base. So I just sew across that base, sew across my notch where my folder over is on the gusset, just machine baste that together. If you want to pin all the way around and sew from start to end, please do so. It does not matter. If you get a better result that way, then do it. Right, we're going to stop here, clip, 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 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimetre apart, just around the curve. So I'm pushing that top surface out so as those raw edges on the edge of the seam allowance are sitting on top of each other. Right, we're going to clip, clip, clip. Done. So there we have a lining. You can give it a light press if you wish. Okay, just checking to make sure we haven't got any gaps anywhere. I haven't forgotten anything. I haven't left anything off. So there's the top section, which is going to be sewing to each side of our zipper. There's our hole to turn our project through. So you could press those seams, those straight seams there, you could press those lightly so as they press to the front and back panel. Turn your lining inside out. And we're going to be ready to put it into our bag. So I've pressed those seams towards the centre there. Don't need to stay stitch. We should be okay. Right, we have our backpack inside out, and we're going to stitch our lining, one side of our lining, to the zip. Now I'm going to do that in two sections to start off with, so centre on centre, and seam on seam, step on step. Okay. Pin or clip this. I sometimes think that the clips, when you're manipulating a bag like this at this stage, sometimes the clips do move a little bit. I do like sometimes a pin rather than a clip. The gusset is straight, whereas the curve is, the panel is curved, so therefore the gusset will always feel a bit proud in that corner. I'm going to just stitch that first section. Okay, so I've stitched from that first section from here to here. I stitched with the panel up. That section that I've left open, when that goes across the end of the zip, that's going to just be hand stitched into place, okay? Very much like the bunny backpack and the downtown tote. So, two little clips can take the pressure off that corner and stop any pleats from forming, because they will form if you're not careful. So let's do the other section of this. So one quarter's done. Let's do the other quarter. So seam on seam. It's funny, the first side is always quite alive and doesn't want to play properly or nicely. And then the second side goes on perfectly. I always find that with doing a lining in this way. If you have some pleats in your lining, do not worry about it. No one is going to be looking. So here we go. So we're starting at that step where you've got lining turned over and finished, where you've got that seam, and where you had your notch, which you marked 2 centimetres down from that seam, or 2.5 centimetres down from the seam. Keep the edges level using your zip foot. Stitching just inside the perimeter stitching line. This time it's the zip stitching line. And I will go around this a couple of times sometimes to get that stitching looking perfect. See how it's a little bit jiggery? I'll sometimes go around and straighten that up a bit. So that's one section done, and then we've got the other section. So I've got my clips holding my gusset into place there and there. Let's clip this all together, centre on centre. So we've got this seam and pulling through the project, and we're about done. We're almost about done. See how that looks a little bit full there? If there's a little pleat that happens there, no one is going to see it. And you can see when you lift up that line there. See my step? It's just there. Didn't mean for it to be there, but it just is. Your one will be even. Right. Working from the other side to sew this, you're working with the panel up. There's our last section there. So I've trimmed one back, so we just trim it back by starting at nothing at the seam and then just going back to about 1/4 of an inch. Oops. On our screen, sorry. Bring that down, that's better. Just a 1/4 of an inch, shy 1/4 of an inch. Not too close. You want sometimes you don't want to cut the structure out of the corners. I'm not going to clip this curve either. I want it to sit quite proud on the inside, and it will do that between the lining and the outside panel because you've got another layer inside there. You've got the sandwich of the zip. So let's fold this in half, give it a bit of a scrunch and reach up into the lining and pull the project through the gap in the bottom of the lining. Just take it quietly. Push that top zip piece through. And slowly roll the lining down the backpack panels. Okay, sorry, I just stopped to take a photo. There we go. So that's the lining turned through. I wouldn't normally turn it through at this stage when I want to show you what it looks like. So you can see that that's all nicely fitted out in there. Now, see there's 2 gaps there at the bottom of the zip panel. So that's just going to be pinned into place, and we're going to hand sew that along the line there. You could top stitch it if you were clever. There's the gap in the bottom of the lining. We can sew that together, or you can push it up that gap before you hand sew it and just sew that seam closed. 6 to 1, half dozen the other way. If you wish to do this, I've just pushed it up through that gap on the side at the below the bottom of the zip. And I'm just going to sew across the bottom of that with the machine. Pop it back down there. No one will be the wiser. So, there we have it. Great little project. Ever so cute. Jumble Backpack. Roll the big fluffy towel up and give it a press. And there we have it.
Join our Jumble Backpack sew along on Facebook and shop our design at swpea.com. Click the links below.